good to see people here after the snowy chaos of last week. So we effectively begin the semester again. I'm going to Moodle the lecture from last week for anyone who wasn't here for it. Looking at different types of poetry, different approaches to poetry, how we read it, how we understand it, and so on and so forth. Just a reminder of a couple of things. Well done if you've been checking your emails and things and keeping up to speed on what's happening. You should have received a list of poems that you were due to look at in today's seminar. Did you get that? Yes? No? Some people did, some people didn't. Okay, well you will have had one, so check your mail. There's only a handful of them. The other thing also that you need to have done for tomorrow is read the sections on literary history in the Norton anthologies. So the section on the medieval period, but focusing probably on pages 10 to 21 in volume 1. And also the section on the 16th century, which is page 485 to 513, I think. And you need to know these historical sections because you've got a test on that history drawing upon those sections, so you'll need to know that. So you need the Norton anthologies. Today, we have the most famous poetic form, I would say, which is the sonnet. Presumably, most people have seen a sonnet or have heard of one and are familiar with it. What is or makes a sonnet, do we think? What is one of the characteristics of a sonnet? 14 lines, yes, absolutely. Anything else? Can we embellish upon that?
There are two types, the Petrarchan and Shakespearean.
Absolutely. There are two types originally. There's a Petrarchan sonnet and the Shakespearean sonnet. There are in fact three. There's the even fancier one, which is not looked at so much, but but they are the main two, you're right, which is the Spenserian sonnet, which is just Edmund Spenser showing off. But we'll have a look at how he shows off in a bit. So, for the most part, two types, Petrarchan and Shakespearean, otherwise known as the Italian sonnet or the English sonnet. And we're going to see how these all work. Anything else? 14 lines, two main types, although there's a third. Anything else about the sonnet? We're going to see all this anyway, so don't worry. For example, how long is a line in a sonnet? Do we know that? Well, this is one of the things we're going to see. So the sonnet, I've called this lecture Form and Matter, because in a sonnet, form and matter work together to create the whole. Its form is the shape, the outline, the kind of grid you have in your mind. You can make a sonnet quite easily. The matter is the content. And if you alter the form, then you alter the content. If you change the word order, anything, you change the meaning. And this is part of what a sonnet does. And it's been described as a kind of metaphysical crossword, with bits going across and bits going down. And it's good fun to play with, the sonnet. And it was without doubt the dominant poetic form of the Renaissance, or the early modern period. In fact, I should mention actually some of the terms I'm using in terms of history here. I'll use three different terms and I'll move between them. The first one is the late medieval. Now, the late medieval period we can consider as going from, say, the year 1200 to the year 1500. This is very rough, again, because history doesn't work in neat blocks. We just have to use it as best we can. So late medieval period, around 1200 to 1500. So many problems why this is difficult to say this is the late medieval period is because the Italians had their Renaissance earlier than we do. We just copy. So we'll say that, 1200 to 1500, late medieval. Early modern period, we will say 1500 to 1660. That'll be a rough guide. Again, people debate these things. They say, well, this is where it starts and this is where it ends and things like that. But that's what we're going for, 1500 to 1660, or thereabouts. And again, you need to have these in mind when we're looking at what we do with literary history. The early modern period, in fact, is the sort of reformed name for the period which used to be known as the English Renaissance. Now, the Renaissance as a term is dubious, or has become so in recent years, because Renaissance means what? Do you know what Renaissance means? Rebirth, exactly. And rebirth suggests something sort of like that. Something that classical culture has been reborn overnight. When there's a great injustice to the period known as the Middle Ages, which of course didn't exist until the Renaissance, because there can't be a middle bit until there's a bit after it. So literary history is very problematic, as we'll see. But for our own, just to stop ourselves going mad, we will say that the late medieval, 1200 to 1500, the early modern period, 1500 to 1660 or thereabouts, also known as the Renaissance. Does that seem fairly straightforward? Good. Right. Sonnet, then. The dominant form of the early modern or Renaissance period. In 1575, George Gascoigne says, this is what makes a sonnet. Then have you sonnets. Some think that all poems, being short, may be called sonnets, as indeed it is a diminutive word derived of sonare, from the Italian sonetto, meaning little sound. But yet I can best allow to call those sonnets, which are of 14 lines, see, you got that? Every line containing 10 syllables, which is absolutely right. The English sonnet is usually written in iambic pentameter. The first 12 lines do rhyme in staves or quatrains, or 4 lines by cross meter, and the last 2 rhyming together do conclude the whole. So what we need to figure out then is what he means by cross meter, and it's the rest of it. It's kind of confusing because there are so many different parts of a sonnet. You can take a sonnet to bits, and it comes into all different bits. It's a bit like Lego, as you'll see, but in a kind of metaphysical Lego way. So do we all understand iambic pentameter? Because this is essential, I think, to reading a sonnet, knowing what iambic pentameter is. Does anyone want to say what it is? What it might be? An iamb, aside from being a nutritious form of cat food, is a unit of 2 syllables. So the word today is an iamb, because there's a stress on the second syllable. So 1 iamb equals the ding. Today I went to the pub and had a beer. I didn't, of course, not open it. But that's how the rhythm works. The ding, the ding, the ding, the ding, the ding. Right. It's called pentameter because meter in Greek just means foot, penta means 5. So pentameter just means 5 iambs. 5 feet of iambic verse. Da-din, 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 da-din. Right, so that's those 10 syllables that it's referring to. So, are we all okay with that? Again, you'll know more of this in the seminars and things like that, but it's important to just have that basic grasp of iambic pentameter. So the first 12 lines of the sonnet do rhyme in cross meter. Now we'll come back to cross meter because you have to work out what that is. It's what in Italian is called the rime incrociate, kind of crossed rhyme. Stave there just means a stanza. That's what they used to call it then. Stave equals stanza. So the first 12 lines, 4 lines by cross meter. So 3 groups of 4. This is what makes up your sonnet. 3 quatrains. And the last 2 make a rhyming couplet. Sort of sum the whole thing up. And the rhyming couplet does a number of different things. It can be a conclusion. It can actually be a turning against what's gone before. It can change lots of things. But we'll see it in practice. We'll have a look at a whole sweep of sonnets. These are some important terms. You won't have to write them all down now, but it's worth keeping them in your head for the rest of the lecture. Iambic pentameter, 10 syllables. We've already mentioned. Da-din, 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 da-din. The first 8 lines of a sonnet is called the octave. Which is fairly straightforward. The last 6 lines are called the sestet. Now between the octave and the sestet, something very strange happens, which is called the volta, meaning the turn. And this is a kind of a turn in tone. It might be a slight shift in aspect to the whole sonnet. You don't actually see the volta. It doesn't actually have any kind of physical existence.